everyone. Welcome to another episode of Bella TV. And what better time to bring you guys this amazing mental health panel than with the current situation that we're all living in. I am Vanessa Coppes, editor-in-chief of Bella, joined by our publisher and Bella TV host, Jennifer DeCillis. And we have an amazing group of mental health professionals joining us today for this wonderful conversation. Emily Lowenfels from Figure 8 Therapy, Gerry Viggiani, I hope I said that right, specializing in maternal mental health and addiction, Dr. Robi Ludwig, who is, part of the Bella team for years, and you've seen her as a contributor to many news channels, also being giving her feedback as a mental health expert, and Julie Davelman, who you work with families, divorced parents, and also with obviously mental health, which is the topic that we're covering today. Welcome, ladies. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So let's jump right in. World pandemic, coronavirus. We've been called to stay home, to quarantine. And, you know, I was briefly talking before we actually started recording how I feel like there's been this progression, right? Like week one, we were in shock, we were taking shelter, like mass hysteria. Week two was like, oh my God, is this really happening? Yes, it's actually really happening and it's getting worse. Week three, we're kind of seeing more of an acceptance stage to a sense of this whole shelter in place that we're all living in. But emotions arise from all different angles. People have lost their jobs. Children are stuck home without being able to go outside and see their friends. Major milestones in the lives of teenagers, college students that are having to have canceled graduations, proms, and all things that may seem frivolous in a world that, with what we're living, but important milestones nonetheless to someone's lives. And most importantly, the loss of income with a lot of families that are really feeling the pressure, the stress of all of this. And if any of us have any family members that work in the healthcare industry, we all know that these are literally the frontline workers that are facing this pandemic on a daily basis. How can we begin to even digest, right, to unpack all of these emotions that we're feeling right now? If anyone would like to, Emily, we can start with you.
Sure. I think one of the biggest things that we can do, and I should just point out that I'm a children and family therapist. So, having open conversations within the family unit is a really important place to start, and giving the most simplified version of what's happening to the appropriate developmental place where each family member may be at is very important. I'm finding just within my own work that there's a lot of individuals who are still very confused about what's happening right now, and just really need to be able to say it out loud, hear what other people have to say. So I think that's really like the family unit is the first place to start with this.
Awesome. Gerry?
I was just going to say also in, the maternal mental health, or even as far as trauma goes, is helping people kind of like shrink down to today versus spiraling out to what's going to happen when I deliver my baby in 7 months, or, my kids are never going to be able to go back to school, or, so kind of helping my clients keep it into what's today, what's good with today, staying within a structured mindset, because I think there was a lot initially of anxiety, and now I'm seeing sort of the opposite of like depression and sinking into sort of a despair or hopelessness. So if we could just stay in, I'm healthy today, you know, I have a roof over my head today, you know, and keeping it in today.
Robert?
What I've been saying to clients, sorry, it was
Oh, I'm
that
sorry.
3 months from 3 months ago, we could have never predicted today.
Yeah.
So you cannot at this point predict 3 months from now.
Nope.
So what is the point of focusing on how things are going to be in a future you cannot actually predict?
Mhm.
So doing exactly what Gerry is saying, let's focus on the things we currently know, which only extend to today. Tomorrow, they can invent the cure and we'll be back to work. Or tomorrow, they can say we're never leaving the house until they come up with a cure, and we're literally not in the house for the next 3 months.
Right.
It is completely unpredictable. So why waste the emotional energy, which you already is kind of taxing, to also worry about something that may be unpredictable or is unpredictable?
Robbie?
So, you know, what I tell my patients is it's really about mental fitness. And it's a marathon versus a sprint. And there are things that we can do today that make us feel better. There are things that we can control. Listen, the reality is our world is always a bit unpredictable. We're just in denial most of the time, which is probably healthier. We don't need to really think about that.
Yeah.
So to think about your schedule, to think about self-care, to really be aggressive in terms of determining what works for you and making that happen on a regular basis. Structure your day. If you know that you're waking up and in the morning you read the mail, you watch a little bit of the news, you're going to work out, you have a Zoom conference call, as much as you can have a regularized schedule, that really does help us to feel better and more connected.
I love that, because that's where I have found myself, where I'm like forcing myself to continue to just do exactly what I used to do, obviously within my, you know, the walls of my home. But what can we say, what can you ladies say to someone who already had mental health issues before all of this happened, you know, someone who is a depressed person, someone with bipolar disorder, or someone who is struggling with addiction? What can, and now this kind of is just adding to the triggers or to the situation, right? What can you say to someone who's going through the difficulties plus what we're all living? Let's start the other way around. Julie?
So one thing that I would say is for people who have been in treatment or who have relationships with either the therapist or their psychiatrist, make sure you maintain those relationships. This is not a time to stop therapy. This is not a time to not be in touch with your psychiatrist. And they unfortunately aren't going after you. So it's really about being proactive and making sure you stay on top of it. The other thing that I've been kind of trying to tell people is there is going to be a day when we're allowed out of our houses, and you want to be in the best condition you can be on that day. So getting the help right now will help you be in that place then, right? So it's really not only about how do we get through this dark period, but also how do you come out of it, right? So right now, as you know, yes, telehealth may not be ideal. Yes, a Zoom therapist or a Zoom psychiatrist meeting is not the best way to do it, but it's only half, right? And you're better off doing it now and getting through this in a productive way than having to rejoin the world where everybody's kind of up and going and going and going at 150 miles an hour now, and you just can't, right? What I always tell clients is it's a lot easier to put a little water on a little fire than a lot of water on a big fire. Don't wait for the big fire.
Awesome. Robbie?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, it's really a wonderful time for anyone who's interested in exploring therapy. And it is true, people who have previous addiction histories and previous mental health issues, they may be more vulnerable to this kind of catastrophic change. So right now, most therapists are doing teletherapy, telepsychiatry, telehealth. A lot of AA meetings now are via Zoom. So there really is an effort to reach out to people. And maybe it's even more convenient. I have a lot of patients, they are loving the fact that they can talk to me from their home, that I'm maybe a lot more flexible than I was prior to this. They're like,
Yeah.
hey, can we
Yeah.
change the date? I'm like, you know what? We can.
I got time.
So I feel like there really is this space to work around people's schedule in a very different way. And I agree that now is the time to reach out if you feel that you're isolated or lonely. One of the things that we notice about this virus is that it separates us from the people that we love. And it's a whole different way of being. I can't tell you how many people in New York City have told me to get away from them. And honestly, I've been keeping my 6 feet distance. I'm like, really? Is it like something about me?
You're in New York. You're in New York, Robbie.
I went from people bumping me nonstop to say, get away.
Yeah,
So
oh my God.
definitely the fear level is really high. And to get as much support as you can is really ideal right now, because we're all going through this together and it's new territory.
Yeah, awesome. Gerry?
I think also it's interesting because some of the current clients I have, because they've been in therapy for a while, are actually pretty skillful during this. So in some ways that's a really great thing. And for those that maybe have never been in therapy before, like, I think that this is also a great time to do it, particularly if you do have the more flexibility in your schedule. And I think the last thing I try to bring in is some balance or compassion. This is a scary time, and we could do something about it, right? Taking action can create a sense of empowerment versus sitting back and just allowing this to kind of like happen to you. So bringing in that balance, I think, is important too. And, for my addiction clients, it's remembering there's always a reason to use and there's always a reason not to. So trying to not allow this to become the reason that you decompensate.
I love that. Emily?
To piggyback off of what pretty much I'm hearing everyone say is continue with the therapy. Definitely. I have a lot of clients who weren't really interested in taking part in a video session, but after really speaking with them, for the majority of them, are staying with me at least for a 15 to 30 minute check-in, because I've really, suggested that several times for some of them that it is really important to maintain consistency, because at some point we will be back in the office.
Yeah.
And then where are we going to be at then? At least this way we can kind of continue the relationship. Just to add additionally, I specialize in developmental disorders. So it becomes more of a challenge when you have lower functioning individuals. So you have to be creative, but it's not a reason to not have the session. You have to, sometimes it takes some convincing of the parents. Sometimes it takes some convincing of the client, him or her, themselves. But as long as that consistency is there, then, the support is there. And I admit that I try to stick to a specific time frame, but I do sort of have an on-call policy that if someone is really struggling, I do say at the end of every session, please don't hesitate to reach out at any time, and we'll schedule a few minutes here or there and just talk through whatever's happening in that moment.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Great advice from everyone. Do you guys foresee us just as a whole? And I know this obviously might be a hard question to answer, but it is what's on my mind right now. Like, are we, because people are going to tell me, do you think that obviously how we do business is going to change? Do you think that for yourselves, do you, not just for yourselves and your practices, but do you foresee us, just the way that we behave as human beings after this is all said and done? Will we see a change? Because I personally believe that this is a lesson for humanity. What is happening is a lesson. And I just obviously believe that from a spiritual perspective, because I choose to see the light as opposed to the darkness, because the darkness just does not serve anyone. Do you think that, you know, humanity will pay attention to what is happening? Because yes, we are responding and being more empathetic to a certain extent to each other, but like you said, you're still going out, and when you do, people are still like elbowing you and telling you, get away from me. So do you think that we will really, you know, have been changed by this? And anyone can just feel free to jump in.
I mean, I think so.
Yeah.
I think already it's interesting, because talk about the light and the positive. I've also had many people say to me that they've seen the advantages of all of this.
Yeah.
That there's more quality family time together, that they're getting to know their children in a different kind of way. They're seeing some of the things they always thought they needed and was necessary, it's really not. So there's almost a back to basics about what's important, who's important. I'm so glad that I've said yes to life about various just even get-togethers, because I miss that now. So I think people will come out of this with a new appreciation of face-to-face contact, being able to hug the people that you love who are friends outside of your family. And I do think it is going to change the way we have business. I think there's more of an appreciation that quality work can be done at home. So we will come out of this with a new normal on multiple levels.
Gerry, I know you had your hand up.
I was just going to say, aren't we always perpetually evolving, right? And changing, and, you know, how could this not imprint on us in some sort of way? And so, you know, again, it's going back to that balance. There are going to be people that are going to take this message and they're going to run with it, and they're going to be okay and hopefully better than the people that they were before. And unfortunately, there are people who are not. You know, so I think there's a lot of choices in what's happening and what's going to become. And we saw a lot of this after 9/11 too, right? Where there were people who evolved and changed, and there were heroes and people who felt so much more connected on so many more levels and chose life, just like you said. And then there were people who were not, you know, so I'm hoping the majority of the people will take this and run with it and add to their lives.
Julie?
I just wanted to kind of almost on a lighter note. So for my introverted clients, it's been really interesting, because what we've been having is conversations about how we're ever going to get them to leave the house again. Right? Because normally the world works very like on an extroverted, right? The world is designed for you to go here and go there. And all of a sudden, introverts have had the world turned to them. And now everybody's supposed to act like they've been acting their entire lives. I have clients who say, I don't understand why everybody's upset. I would love to not leave the house for a month.
Oh my God.
It's actually a really interesting perspective, because, but there's some danger for people who generally are introverts as well, because the social contact has to be now proactive, right? So there's a lot of, you know, people getting together on Zoom, and there's Zoom happy hour, and there's meeting for this and a meeting for that, but you have to proactively seek it out. Nobody's saying at the end of a work day, let's go get a cup of coffee, right? Like you have to actually proactively do that. And for people who aren't necessarily looking for it, they aren't getting it. And that's where you run into that complete isolation, which is different from being just an introvert. But I think it's going to be interesting where on day one of end of quarantine, every extrovert is going to run around and hug everybody they can find.
I keep picturing like everybody literally like running out of their houses and just like running around the, you know, like doing laps and hugging everybody. That's what I envision.
Right, exactly. And the introverts are going to say, but I'm not done with my book yet.
That's an interesting way to look at it, though. I love that. Emily?
I'm hopeful that people will really focus on the positives in this whole experience. I also can't help thinking how this is one of those historical events, you know, thinking just as you mentioned, or what 9/11 was mentioned, but you know, World War II, any of these really significant, impactful experiences, we are living that right now. And I'm hopeful that throughout the future years, as we, you know, we can be reminded through history materials and or books, if they still exist,
Yeah.
you know, going forward. And it can kind of be a reminder for us that this is, let's find, you know, let's go back to those positives in humanity. So I am very hopeful for this.
The running joke I keep hearing is like, see, washing your hands always made sense, right? So I'm going to jump into some of our questions that were submitted to by some of our, actually, and they keep on coming, which is super interesting. Okay, so the first question is, this is Gina. While it's equally heartbreaking for parents, how can we help our children deal with the disappointment of canceled milestones, graduation, prom, entire sports season, etc.?
I've been dealing with this personally because my daughter is a senior in high school, and prom's canceled and graduation's canceled and spring break was put off and probably canceled, and you know, this amazing last year of high school to celebrate is all of a sudden non-existent. And so we honor the loss and we honor the grieving and say, this is tough and I appreciate that this is hard, and to try to appreciate this moment in history where you are a contributor to the greater good, and to realize that you know, that there's a responsibility to really understand her role in history, because it's really true. And in some ways she's having an even more powerful experience that I tell her and my son that they will tell their children, their grandchildren. So it's all how it's positioned, but I think to just be open to hearing their sadness and grieving and to help them get through it and to honor it.
Anyone else?
Sure. You can also, to take that a step further, you can find ways to have your own celebrations. I'm sure people have seen throughout social media the drive-by celebrations. We're actually going to be doing that in about an hour or so. The teachers at my son's preschool.
That's awesome.
It's her birthday, so we made signs and we're going to drive by. So finding ways to celebrate these milestones within your, you know, your home is also a really important thing, is recognize the events, honor the events, as well as honoring the sadness. Make it special. So the day that the prom was supposed to happen, maybe put on a fancy dress as a family, have a nice dinner and have a dance, and try to do something to acknowledge these milestones.
I'm clapping because I'm saying that's such a great idea.
Yeah. And for all those people that thought I was losing my mind when I celebrated my cover party in my house, in my playroom, there you go. I couldn't not do it. You know, I had the dress, I had everything, and I encouraged the team, and I said, but I think that a lot of people are still so down in their own, which is fine, and I totally respected that. But those of you, those are the ones that did join me in the fun, it was really refreshing, and it really did cheer me up to look at those pictures after the fact and be like, oh, we did it. We did it. Anybody else wanted to chime in on that?
I wanted to add for a second that the other thing is that milestones are really about forming memories, right? And about having those events happen. And those events still happen, although they didn't happen in the traditional way or they didn't happen at the time. There's nothing that prevents the same kids who didn't go to prom from getting together and having a really fancy party in 6 months, right? And really moving some of those memories. And again, is it ideal? No, but it's better than nothing. And I think a lot of the philosophy right now is really, as everyone was saying, let's figure out how to do the best we can under the circumstances and have something rather than nothing. It's not so black and white, right? So we can't have this memory right now. We can recreate it later. We will, when you get your diploma finally, we will do something special when we can, right? So not necessarily just writing it off as something that didn't happen or couldn't happen, but it's something that is going to happen at a later point in time when we are able to do that.
Yeah, I actually saw, to your point, I saw something similar on, I think, Facebook. My brother is also a senior in high school, so his class trip, his prom, his graduation have all been canceled, and he's obviously, very upset. And it was, don't cancel these things, postpone them, whether it's August, September, whenever we have to do them, but like still give these kids, maybe not a class trip, but a prom and some kind of a graduation, like give them the opportunity to, get to do these huge things that they're obviously very upset about. So
right.
I like
even
that
if it
idea.
means coming back for them, right? So even for the graduates who might be coming back, this might be something that gets merged with next year's prom.
Yeah.
Or something that, at next year's graduation, there's a double ceremony. So
Right.
something that allows for them to be honored, and so they still can form the memories. They just don't have to form them this particular second.
Right.
I think it's helpful too to find the silver lining, right? So like I have a client whose wedding got canceled and it's now rescheduled for November. And, it was helping her to find out like, well, what is in your power? What could we do that would actually make this a fortunate sort of event? And so she said, well, I could save up more money and I could get the flowers that I really wanted to get, which I couldn't get before. So looking at like even the graduation, that's really, really hard. And as Dr. Robbie spoke to, honoring that grief, but is there a silver lining that we could find in this? There's this story about, and Emily, you may know it, it's for families who have non-traditional circumstances with their children. And it talks about how you have this trip planned to Italy and to go to Rome, and you get on the airplane and you fall asleep, and when you wake up, you're not in Italy, you're in Holland, right? And so, you could choose to be horribly disappointed because you aren't going to go to Rome, but Holland is a beautiful place too, right? And so working on acceptance of that and the concept of it being good enough as it is.
I love that. That's great. Great advice overall. There's a lot of questions regarding canceled milestones. So words of wisdom is what people are looking for, and encouragement so that they could share with their children. So I think across the board, you all touched on that. So that's great. Jennifer from Venezuela asks, how could she prevent the feeling of isolation in all of this? If anybody.
I think it's connecting ways that you can connect. So doing, as Emily was talking about too, like, and I think someone else was talking about it as well, right? Like these Zoom cocktails and even like going for a walk, right? So with the social distancing, my husband and I have been walking around the neighborhood, and, with the appropriate distance, somebody's on the other side of the street walking their dog, and just making eye contact with them and saying, hi, how are you? Because as humans, we need to have that. Well, not everybody, but a lot of people need to have that social contact. So it's finding the ways you can do that, doing the drive-bys, maybe standing at the bottom of the driveway and having your elderly parents, wave to you through the window. Just being creative, connecting with nature. I find a lot of my clients are really enjoying that too, like making sure they're getting outside, having an appreciation for connection to your animals if you have pets, I think is also a great way. So being creative.
I think in a really busy world, this is for once time when people are somewhat less busy. So, and you've been seeing this on like social media as much, people are reconnecting with people who they generally don't have time to connect with. So, there might be the immediate 10 people you normally talk to that are your family and your closest friends, but the friends from high school you haven't spoken to in 20 years, they may suddenly be available. So that may be really a time to reconnect with relationships you haven't had the time to give. The other interesting things is for the adult children who are coming home. So some of the young adults who are returning to their homes to quarantine at home, I find that it's been a good time for them to connect with the parent they were less connected with. So let's say you were really close with your mom your whole life, and you kind of only have a relationship with your dad through your mom, where you find out things through her about him. This is the time to kind of reestablish that relationship in a direct way. and using it to come out with a plan for how are we going to maintain this once we're allowed out of the house again.
That's great.
Absolutely. If you don't, can I say one thing
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah.
In a specific situation, I have a client who's high functioning on the spectrum who is using specifically Instagram and one of his ways to stay engaged and to connect with others is to post on Instagram at least once a week, because just getting attention, getting a like, getting a comment on whatever that post is feeling connected to others.
Yeah.
So that's one way.
I just find the irony of what we're living with. Before all of this happened, social media was, scolded upon, and we were being told that it was creating more isolated human beings because we were just on our phones and whatnot. And right now we're so dependent on the devices and the computer. My son came in yesterday when I was here, and I was just writing, like the entire day I just spent it writing and emailing and just like catching up on old emails that I should have, and he was like, you've been in here for like 24 hours, and it's just fascinating to see now that this is the way that we're craving connection and avoiding isolation. So that's I guess what life will serve up for you, right? In the most ironic way. Lauren asks, how do we maintain self-care during this time, especially now that we're homeschooling and trying to sustain a business? Carving out me time is a challenge.
It has to be deliberate. It's not something you can automatically think will happen. And I often tell my patients, you need to take this for yourself. I have some nurses who are working on COVID-19 floors, and they feel that guilt if they don't say yes to everything. And I'm like, you can't. Yeah. And I heard this quote, and it's so true. If you say yes to everybody, then in a way you're saying no to yourself. Yeah. So really carve out that time, be deliberate about it, whether it's reading, taking a bath with candles, meditating, exercising. Know that it won't happen naturally, that it's something you really need to structure deliberately in your day.
I also find setting your alarm and getting up close to the time that you used to get up. A lot of my clients are like, oh, I feel like I have so much less time in my day. And when I ask them, what time are you waking up? They're like 10, 11. And I mean, it might seem
way
like
to go.
I was going to say, like, I want some of that, because that has
little kids.
I don't always have clients who have little kids, but if they have teenagers and those teenagers are up until 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, on social media, right? They're falling into that habit as well. And so they've shortened their day by 2 or 3 hours. So sticking to a reasonable wake up time, maybe you don't have to commute into the city anymore. So you don't have to get up at 4 a.m.
Vanessa's so happy.
A reasonable time. And then you're absolutely right, Dr. Robbie, is like, it has to be done with intention, so even if it's so intentional that you sit down and write in an agenda when you're going to carve that time in for yourself.
Absolutely.
Anyone else?
Sure. We heard earlier about a schedule. What I've been suggesting to every single one of my clients and or their parents is to put in some sort of plan, an agenda. You don't necessarily have to make it as structured as a school day or a regular day. You don't have to put a time frame on, but just a list of wake up, have breakfast, answer some emails or do some schoolwork, take a break to go run outside or do yoga or whatever, but make a specific plan for the day that you can follow. Because having that plan provides that necessary structure to feel productive and motivated. I think that's what we fall into when we don't have that, is we become unmotivated and unproductive. And it makes that also leads to the negative feelings. So the more productive we feel, the better we can help ourselves, the better we can carve out that time for self-care, even if it's a 5-minute walk to the mailbox. I mean, honestly, I'll tell you, that's one of the highlights of my day, to just go and get my mail.
Go get the mail.
Go get the mail. That's a highlight to get out of my house. There are some days I don't leave at all except to do.
Yeah.
So even that is, it doesn't seem like it, but that's a little bit of self-care.
I was just going to add quickly, kind of to piggyback on that. Don't aim so big. So if you find that 30 minutes of yoga is not something you can put into your day, it's okay to have a 5-minute cup of coffee, even if you have to lock yourself in the bathroom to have it.
Yeah.
Right? It's really about figuring out what's realistic and having that success. So start small and make it happen rather than aim big and keep missing it. Right? So figure out what will your day allow and when will allow, right? If you used to have a coffee break at 11 o'clock in the afternoon when you were in the office and you can't do that anymore because that's smack in the middle of homeschooling, then have it at 9 o'clock at night when everybody goes to sleep.
Yeah.
Or have it at some time when, when something else is downtime, right?
Yeah.
So it's just really about figuring out what works and having that success.
I think one of the things that I just keep telling myself is, and I think that obviously it's just, expectations that I have of myself is just, what will I have accomplished during this time? It's what I keep, because I can't just sit here and wallow and be like unproductive. It's what will I look back and say, okay, well, during this time, this is actually what I managed to do. It's kind of like a little mantra. I keep, whenever I feel like I'm going to be like, I'm going to have one of those meh days, I'm like, yeah, no, we got to keep it moving. Let's keep going, keep it together. And as far, going back to the topic of self-care, my kids are sleeping in later and I always waked up earlier regardless. So I'm definitely making it a point to make that time my time to work out, to meditate, to pray, to write in my journal. Like those are the things that I, and then at nighttime, I have a skincare ritual before I go to bed that I just lock myself in the bathroom and it's kind of like my mini spa time. And it's 20 minutes of heaven that I just dedicate to myself. And it's been really, really helpful, especially now during this time. Okay.
Sorry,
go ahead.
Can we talk for a second about kind of the flip of the topic you just introduced about being productive and looking back about what you would have accomplished?
Sure.
I feel like there's this new kind of mode of what I think people are calling like the new Tiger Mom on social media. It's the
I think it's because of Tiger King.
Yeah.
It's because of Tiger King.
Not that one. Teaching your kid, today I taught my kid their 9th language and they've also played the violin and we repainted the house in our free time. And all of these other grand things happen. Oh yeah, and I also work a full-time job.
Trust me, I am not referring to any of that because ain't nobody teaching any languages right now. Like, no, I have enough schoolwork as it is.
What I wanted to say is exactly that. You can only do what you can do.
Of course.
And it doesn't matter what everybody else posted on Facebook, right? So this is a really bad time to start comparing yourself to others. Because you don't know people's circumstances, you don't know their resources, you don't know what else they're doing. So do what you can with your family and it only has to work for you, right? If your kid does not come out of it having learned the 9th language, that's okay. They're probably going to get by anyway, right?
I love
that kind of judgment of yourself about having to accomplish all of these grand things now that you've had time at home. Because although you may be home, you don't necessarily have any more time.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Oh, I feel like I have less time, honestly.
I will look up at the clock at the end of the day and I'm like, oh my God, it's 4. Like I couldn't the day just went by. So 100% agree with that. Okay. Ilse asks, for people who suffer from germophobia, they must be living a nightmare right now. How do family members help support them during this terrible time? That's a great question. Anyone?
Listen, we know from the CDC what needs to be done. Washing your hands in a certain kind of way frequently is a really good strategy. I think just following the recommendations out there, keeping hygienic, but not going overboard. And again, that's where a therapist or a psychiatrist can come in to really support, a person who's struggling with OCD or anxiety.
There's a lot of really good evidence-based modalities. I hate to throw around these big words, but that are very effective in working with people who are germaphobes. So I think it's being mindful of bringing in that perspective, and sometimes people just need a little extra help. Therefore, that's where a therapist can come in.
Awesome. Anyone else? I'll get right into the next one. Okay, I'm telling you, these people are on fire. Okay, Maureen asked, I just found out my mother's cancer treatment has been put on hold indefinitely. She receives immunotherapy once a month. How can we keep her spirits up when the treatment that literally brought her back to life has now been halted? What can we do, if anything? She has metastatic stage 4 kidney cancer. The treatments gave her 4 more years with us. What are the ramifications of this being stopped? Anyone?
And it goes back into living in today, right?
Yeah.
We don't know what's going to happen. You know, her cancer probably was quite unpredictable as it was. And so we can focus on the blessing of what is. We can work towards staying and enjoying every single day, because honestly, none of us, as Dr. Julie said before, none of us know what's going to happen tomorrow, right? We only know what's happening today in this moment. So working on maybe connecting with her in the ways that we can in this moment, and enjoying the day for what it is. It's hard.
And
Anybody
really
else?
maybe
Yeah,
having the
Julie.
conversation with the doctors about what their thinking is, and about why, whether she was in more potential danger going into getting a treatment right now than staying home and taking a chance on the delay. Possibly arming yourself with some information and what are some of the realistic consequences of this may be the best option you have, because I'm sure the doctors didn't make that decision lightly. And really understanding their thinking process may give you some kind of, if not peace of mind, but at least a little bit of grasp of what you're facing.
That's great advice. Okay. Karen says what about people, and I know we kind of delved into it a little bit earlier, but she's talking specifically about people with anxiety. And I think anxiety is a big one. And maybe for people who never had it before are starting to develop it now. What are some resources or some tools that we can give them today? Emily.
Well, I think the best thing for anxiety is I'm sorry, did somebody else jump in there before
okay,
me?
go
It's okay, go, and then
Okay.
Emily, go.
I was just going to say, when someone has anxiety, they go straight to the worst case scenario.
Catastrophic.
Right. So,
Yeah.
so I think it's important to understand that is a byproduct of their anxiety, and to think about what they can take control of today. Because action is a wonderful antidote. I know my kids are walking back and forth.
Love it. Listen, this is the new normal. Go
Maybe
for
they'll
it.
make their debut. But really action and what you can take control over. And really we are being told what we can take control over to keep ourselves safe. We may not like the recommendations, but there are recommendations out there. And to identify when your fight or flight is in overdrive, and realize, that's your anxiety speaking, and the feelings are not fact. So it's good to remind patients who are very anxious how their mind is working in overdrive right now, and that's not an indication of real concern in terms of their life or how in danger they are.
Anybody else?
I was gonna say a very similar thing. It's just really understanding that the anxiety are distorted thoughts, and are thoughts that have become out of control. And we just need to learn how to regain that control over those thoughts, and finding ways to do that. I use a lot of mindfulness in my practice to do that. As well as, just really addressing negative versus more productive or positive thoughts. So isolating that is, I think, really important in addressing the anxiety for now. So
I think I've also been kind of recommending that people use their anxiety as a cue for action when possible. So if you think about kind of arousal, when people aren't particularly stressed at all, right? It's the I don't care model. and they're not doing anything. They're not taking the precautions. They're not taking the right actions. The people at the high extreme of anxiety are so paralyzed with fear that they're, again, not doing anything productive, right? They're not taking the precaution because they're too distracted. They're too immobilized to do anything. What you want to be is in that middle range where you're concerned enough to follow the precautions, but not so concerned that you're paralyzed. And really using that sense of anxiety to keep yourself on target and in action, right? So what I say to people is, how do we, worry doesn't get you anywhere, planning does. So let's turn the worry to an active phase, and how do we turn this into planning or taking precautions rather than just sitting and worrying?
I love that.
Also, from a traumatic client's, scenario, because I see a lot of trauma, it's also, what skills do we know help ground us, bring us back into what I call our window of tolerance, right? Like, so that grounded space where we can be productive and we're not swimming around in the cesspool of negative thoughts, right? So different grounding skills, mindfulness, breathing, 5 things you see, 4 things you hear, 3 things you smell, 2 things you taste, and 1 thing you feel, whatever. The 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 scenario. There's lots of different ways that we can ground ourselves into the actual moment that we're in and calm that fight or flight anxiety.
I saw him. Love it. So,
I thought it was very clever.
It was amazing. Amazing. That was epic. I think that's going to be like our little reel to promote
That's
this.
great.
We have another question, but before we get into that, I think, because I think it's relevant to what we were just discussing, is I also think it's a time to feel the feelings, right? Like, I think that we are, in a way, have been programmed to, despite being sad or upset, I got to show up and I got to, yesterday was it was a day where I was like, if I get one more email with bad news, I am going to implode. Like, I think I felt like crying, like just crying and it isn't that, it wasn't that I didn't allow myself to cry, but I just allowed myself to be sad. Like, I allowed myself to just be in the moment, as opposed to pushing it away or trying to, shift it. Because eventually, as you all know, that comes out in some form or way or other, and what I find is that when we suppress these feelings, then they manifest as, intolerance with your children or with the spouse, or unnecessary anger where it's, where it's misled. How can we, now is a time to be just sitting with the sadness, the frustration, the overwhelm, the anger, because all of these things, we're all feeling them in one shape or another. And it's okay. It's okay for people to know. I just want the yeses from the people who are mental health experts. But yeah, I just found myself in that place yesterday, and I was like, you know what? And then every morning you just wake back up and do it all over again.
Well, Vanessa, to speak
yes.
to what you're talking about, that really is mental fitness,
Yeah.
right? So that is saying, I'm going to have a reaction to the restrictions in my day, and that makes sense. And then I think it's always good to ask yourself the question, how can I use this to my advantage? So always making that pivot choice, right? Yeah. Because there are always going to be people who find the opportunities within these times that are challenging. And so the goal is, where can I find my opportunity today? How can I use this day to my advantage? So always putting yourself in a position where you're trying to make the most of what is, I think, is also very valuable while you're honoring your feelings.
Awesome. That's great. Thank you for that. Theodora says, small business owners can survive. We are seasonal businesses. We take out a line of credit to get through the winter and typically pay it off May, June. Now being faced with the fact that I may not be able to open my store this summer, how do we stay focused and positive? That's a big one.
Stay connected to the business opportunities that you can. If you have like local chambers of commerce, stay connected to those people. You know, continue to market yourself in the way that you can so that when you come out on the other side of this, potentially you can hit the ground running. There's lots and lots of resources out there for small businesses. The government does not want small businesses to go out of business right now. So, you know, going to your state's or your country's small business government websites, there's a lot of ways that we can float through that. And again, staying connected to the people that you are already connected to in the business world, checking on your, you know, the clients that you've already worked with, and just saying, you know, I'm here, you know, if you were happy with my service, please remember me when we get through the other end of this. I think that connection piece is super important, and then leaning into the resources that we actually have.
Awesome.
I think the other thing that people can do is use this time to optimize things they never have time to optimize. So learning that new software that would make your business work better, but you don't have time to, you know, take out the old software and put the new one in and learn how to use it. This may be the time to do it. Putting in processes that you haven't had time to kind of think through and do, so that you're using this time to make the business that will survive on the other end better and more functional, so that you're not, although you may not be able to build business, you may be able to use the business you have to make it better.
Awesome.
Continue to network.
Yeah.
There's lots of opportunities out there.
Something that I've personally done is just reached out to people who have supported me, like all of you in the past, and, you know, continuing to bring people together and to the forefront, and how can I be of service to you now with what I can, and however which way I can, because we have to work together. I mean, there's not another choice but to do that, to continue to stay afloat. So I love that. I love that advice. Anything else?
Yes. It's also a really great opportunity to look at this as a positive challenge. How can you be creative? How can you add to your business? How can you do something that's outside of the box that can still help keep your business afloat? In a way, a lot of times we could become complacent in our work, and we just kind of we go through the motions. So this is a really great opportunity to give yourself a challenge, which will further your business, just further your motivation, further your productivity, and just sort of, you know, just overall, it produces a opportunity to do something maybe you never did before, or, you know, just to try new things.
Love that. Anyone else? Okay. It's been so like, I know I needed to have this conversation on so many different levels. So this has been really, really amazing to discuss with all of you. What is one thing that you can tell, you know, anyone who's coming to you, or all of us who are watching this? What is the one thing that you could do right now to just improve your mental health, or your well-being, or emotional well-being today? We can go round robin. Robin, go ahead, Robin.
I was going to say, you know, how can you make each day feel really rewarding is a great question to ask yourself each morning, and to come up with 3 ideas that feel really manageable so you can feel successful each day.
Awesome. Julie?
I think for me, it's really been telling people to do something rather than nothing, right? Figure out what's the best that you can do in every particular circumstance, and do that.
Love that. Gerry?
Gratitude. So I tell my clients, what are you grateful for today?
Amazing. Emily?
Choose a goal for the day, you know, one goal, and accomplish it. And then at night, think about it. Take just a moment right before you go to sleep and think about what did I do today? Did I accomplish that goal? Take a deep breath, and hopefully that'll help you get to sleep and ready for the next day.
Awesome. Ladies, this has been amazing. This has been truly helpful. And I know that we will help so many people who watch. Thank you so much for your time. We hope that you continue to weather this situation as best as we can all can. And Dr. Robi, your children are free to go now.
It's so funny.
Thank you so much for joining us, ladies.
Yeah,
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
It was
Bye.